Heavy warship. This is Satan's station. You must alter course and head back to the Indian Ocean immediately. If you do not obey my order, you will be targeted. Out. This is coalition warship. We are transiting under international law. No response is required from you and no instructions will be followed. U.S. Navy warship transiting in the vicinity near the port and sea lanes. This is Navy. This is Navy. Morning. 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 Attention all vessels in the Oman Sea. This is Iranian Navy forces. If you observe any warship in your vicinity, maintain a wide distance because we are prepared to open fire without any warning. There is a pattern that anyone closely watching this conflict may have already noticed. The most severe developments tend to occur on weekends. The strikes on high-level facilities, the attacks that caused massive civilian casualties, the sharpest escalations of the entire campaign, and ceasefires that collapse almost immediately after being announced, all tend to unfold between late Friday and early Sunday. During this period, newsrooms are operating with reduced staff, political offices are harder to reach, and public attention is elsewhere, allowing decisions on the ground to harden before they can be challenged or reversed. This weekend followed the same pattern. It begins with what occurred during negotiations, or more accurately, what failed to occur, and then moves into developments that may be even more significant for the direction of the conflict. Subscribe for updates if you have not already. We are tracking multiple overlapping developments that mainstream coverage is missing or underreporting. Press that subscribe button and follow along. Talks between the United States and Iran collapsed in Pakistan. No agreement was reached. A statement was posted claiming the meeting went well and that most issues were resolved except the one that truly mattered, the nuclear issue. Presenting this as a small remaining disagreement is misleading because the nuclear question is the central reason the entire crisis exists. Without resolution on it, there is no framework and no real agreement. The idea of a productive meeting with only one minor issue left unresolved is essentially a political narrative designed to show progress where none exists. But there is a detail from the Pakistan meeting that was not reported widely in Western media and may help explain why the talks failed before they officially broke down. While diplomats were engaged in discussions in Islamabad, multiple warships were reportedly moving toward the Strait of Hormuz. According to regional military sources echoed by several international outlets, the timing suggests the diplomatic process may have been used as cover while attention was focused elsewhere. The reported objective was to reposition naval assets toward the strait, clear previously deployed obstacles, and establish a stronger physical presence before any ceasefire framework could limit movement. If accurate, it would represent a calculated maneuver, using negotiations as a distraction while operational positioning continued in parallel. Iranian forces were monitoring the situation closely and appear to have anticipated the move. Iranian naval intelligence, according to the same sources, detected the ship movements early and responded accordingly. Simultaneous responses. The military channel had missile batteries locked on approaching vessels. The diplomatic channel saw Iranian negotiators in Islamabad quietly informed that the ships were moving toward the strait and warned about what would happen if they proceeded further. The video that opened this transmission, showing Iranian forces issuing a direct radio warning to an American warship to halt or face engagement, is the documented record of what followed. The warship stopped, it reversed course, and shortly afterward the talks in Pakistan collapsed. The American version of events claims the vessels successfully transited the strait and dismisses Iranian claims of forcing a withdrawal. That account was presented without visual proof. The Iranian version was accompanied by footage of radio communications, satellite positioning data, and corroboration from multiple non-Western outlets reporting in real time. The available evidence clearly supports one narrative over the other. Now to China. Because this development shifts the strategic picture of the conflict in ways that even recent public statements from the Trump administration indirectly acknowledge. Reports from Turkish, Russian, Chinese, and Qatari sources point to a converging claim that China has supplied Iran with shoulder-fired anti-aircraft systems, manned portable air defense weapons designed for a single operator to engage low-flying aircraft, helicopters, and drones at close range. If accurate, this marks a significant expansion of Iran's ground-based air defense capability beyond the fixed and mobile systems already observed in this conflict. When asked about this on Fox News, Trump responded in a way that revealed more than it clarified. He said he had heard the reports, expressed doubt that China would take such action because of his relationship with Beijing, and suggested that if it happened at all, it might have been limited to earlier stages. He then warned of a potential 50% tariff on China if caught supplying weapons to Iran. That response is not a denial but a hedge, acknowledging the possibility while avoiding confirmation. The phrasing suggesting maybe at the beginning reflects uncertainty rather than rejection of the claim, while the tariff threat itself implies limited confidence that such economic pressure would actually deter Beijing in a direct confrontation context. To understand what this reveals about leverage between Washington and Beijing, it is useful to recall the last time such tariff threats escalated. When extreme tariff levels were previously proposed, China did not concede or negotiate in the expected manner. Instead, it targeted a critical vulnerability in the American technology supply chain by restricting exports of rare earth magnets. This was not a broad embargo, but a precise and selective restriction that immediately created pressure points in multiple U.S. industries. Washington, because magnets are embedded in virtually every piece of advanced technology the United States produces or operates. Satellites, missiles, electric motors, medical equipment, consumer electronics, and military hardware all depend on them. Even critical infrastructure like precision industrial systems relies on motors built with rare earth magnet components. The production base for replacing these materials domestically does not currently exist in the United States and cannot be created in anything less than years of sustained industrial investment. Trump acknowledged this publicly himself. He stated on camera that China effectively holds a global monopoly over rare earth magnets, and that without Chinese supply chains, the United States would, in his words, be pushed back to a technological stone age. This is not rhetorical exaggeration. It reflects a structural dependency that is already embedded in modern manufacturing systems at every level. That dependency is what makes tariff threats structurally limited. You cannot solve a supply chain vulnerability by taxing the supplier you still depend on. So when Trump threatens China with a stone tariff over alleged missile transfers to Iran, while simultaneously saying he has a good relationship with Beijing and hopes the reports are not true, the signal being received in China is not panic, it is recognition of leverage. The message is essentially the same one that has already been tested in previous confrontations. You know we depend on you, you know you have pressure points, and we know it too. So the public posture becomes escalation rhetoric while the practical reality moves toward managed containment rather than direct confrontation. This matters because even limited Chinese involvement in this conflict, such as supplying man-portable air defense systems, represents more than just an incremental military change. It signals a widening cost curve for American operations in the region. It shows that efforts to fully isolate Iran have not succeeded, and that other major powers are willing to influence the battlefield indirectly in ways that are difficult to counter. Now turning to Turkey, where statements emerging from Ankara over the weekend were unusually direct in both tone and implication. Turkish officials described it as a moral obligation for Turkey to respond militarily to Israeli actions, not merely to condemn them or call for restraint, but to consider force as a legitimate response. It is a NATO member with the second largest standing military in the alliance and a state that directly borders the regional theater. President Erdogan has been gradually building toward this position for months, with rhetoric that has become increasingly escalatory over time, reflecting both domestic sentiment and strategic positioning in a reshaping regional order. A Turkish military intervention against Israel would not be symbolic or limited. It would involve capabilities such as F-16 fighter operations, naval deployments, and potentially ground force elements, which are on an entirely different scale from the non-state actors and proxy networks that Israel has traditionally managed within the region. A direct military confrontation with Turkey would immediately trigger unresolved questions about NATO obligations that the alliance has been carefully avoiding addressing. If Turkey were to engage Israeli forces and Israel invoked its security relationship with the United States, while the United States is already engaged in a broader confrontation involving Iran, and China is simultaneously supplying Iranian air defense systems, and Russia is providing intelligence support, with North Korea observing and adjusting its own calculations, the structure ceases to resemble a regional conflict entirely. The International Criminal Court has issued an arrest warrant for Netanyahu. This is not a symbolic move. ICC warrants are legally binding for the 124 member states of the court. Any state that Netanyahu enters is now legally required to detain him and transfer him to The Hague for prosecution. In practice, enforcement depends on political willingness, and several governments have already signaled they would not comply, but the legal condition itself remains in force. It means a sitting Israeli prime minister cannot travel across much of the international system without risk of arrest. The political and diplomatic consequences of that constraint extend into alliance management, domestic legitimacy, and the internal decision-making incentives shaping military strategy. These pressures accumulate over time rather than appearing all at once. Meanwhile, countries such as Ireland have moved toward recognition of Palestinian statehood and symbolic recognition of Jerusalem as its capital. Italy has condemned Israeli military actions and indicated support for sanctions measures at the UN General Assembly. Germany, Spain, France, and other core Western states that once formed the backbone of political cover for this conflict are increasingly shifting away from that position rather than reinforcing it. The United States remains the only major Western power offering unconditional political backing for continued operations, and even that support is beginning to fracture along domestic political lines already visible in polling trends. The upcoming midterm elections are not a distant factor but an immediate constraint on how long and at what intensity this policy direction can be sustained internally. Another dimension of this weekend's developments connects to earlier reporting that has now been indirectly confirmed by statements from Trump himself. Asian economies are urgently seeking alternative petroleum suppliers because disruption in the Strait of Hormuz has severed key energy routes. As a result, they are redirecting demand toward the Americas, including Gulf Coast production in the United States, Venezuelan crude, and Mexican oil exports. The supply gap is real and the demand is immediate. Hundreds of large tankers are reportedly moving toward American waters because they require replacement supply and Middle Eastern routes are no longer reliable. Mexico, which was positioned to benefit significantly from this shift, produces crude oil and has refining capacity, and its geographic location makes it a natural supplier to redirected Asian shipping routes away from Hormuz. Under normal conditions, this would represent a major commercial advantage for Mexican energy production. However, in recent weeks, multiple disruptions have been reported. Fires have occurred at the Dos Bocas refinery complex in Tabasco, a crude spill has been reported at another site, and a major refinery dependent on Mexican supply experienced operational issues. The combined effect, regardless of individual causes, has reduced Mexico's ability to fully capitalize on the surge in global demand at the precise moment when that capacity had its highest strategic and commercial value, presenting the coincidence for the consideration of anyone who has been paying attention to how global energy infrastructure disruptions have aligned with commercial interests throughout this conflict. Trump appeared on Fox News the same morning and praised the fact that hundreds of supertankers were moving into American Gulf waters to purchase oil. He avoided twice answering the journalist's direct follow-up question about whether disruptions in Mexican supply were linked to that sudden shift in purchasing flows. The reporter pressed him, and twice the question was deflected. Here is the full picture as it stands at the end of this transmission. Negotiations collapsed in Pakistan after Iran reportedly detected American warships attempting to use the talks as cover for a military maneuver toward the Strait of Hormuz and forced them to reverse course. China is supplying Iran with anti-aircraft missiles despite tariff threats from Trump, which Beijing appears to treat as non-binding. Turkey is framing potential military action against Israel as a moral obligation. The International Criminal Court has issued an arrest warrant for Netanyahu. Ireland and Italy are shifting toward formal opposition to Israeli military conduct, while major European NATO members are increasingly distancing themselves from direct alignment with the American campaign. At the same time, American Gulf oil production has become the primary reliable energy source for a large portion of global demand, precisely as alternative supply routes from the Americas face a cluster of reported infrastructure disruptions. The conflict that was expected to conclude quickly has instead evolved into a wider strategic environment in which China is becoming directly involved, Turkey is signaling possible entry, Russia is already engaged through indirect channels, and the United States is facing simultaneous strain on both military capacity and diplomatic alignment. Trump's public response was to post on Truth Social that the Pakistan meeting had gone well. The information war, which we have argued throughout this conflict was the first decisive battleground, was effectively lost long ago. What is unfolding now is the physical and economic phase of that earlier informational breakdown catching up to real-world consequences. We will continue tracking every development, every naval repositioning, every missile transfer, every ultimatum, every infrastructure incident, every legal escalation, and every element of the broader picture that official narratives attempt to minimize or control. Subscribe to stay updated and follow the coverage as it develops in real time.